Distinguished guests, esteemed panelists, and dedicated attendees from across the globe, good evening, and welcome to the third episode of the Peace in Myanmar webinar series, an initiative of the Conflict and Resilience Research Institute Canada, proudly supported by Global Affairs Canada. As an independent, non-profit research institute committed to building social resilience and advancing peace through research, policy dialogue, and public engagement, CREEC has remained at the forefront of examining complex global conflicts with scholarly rigor and policy relevance. Our current series on peace in Myanmar represents a vital strand of this commitment, offering an evidence based platform for critical analysis, inclusive dialogue, and constructive policy suggestions on one of the Southeast Asia's most protracted crises. The audience, before I introduce our speakers and set the background of our today's webinar, let me do the treaty recognition. Our institute is located on the original lands of Anishinaabe, Cree, Ojibwe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homelands of Metis Nation. We all are promise bound to work together in the true spirit of reconciliation and collaboration with Indigenous brothers and sisters. The audience, tonight's episode is titled Rakhine Corridor Road to Peace or Further Violence, which addresses an urgent and highly contested proposal, the establishment of a humanitarian corridor through the Rakhine region. This idea, first publicly articulated by the United Nations Secretary General during his visit to the Rohingya refugee camps in Bangladesh in March 2025. In his discussions, Secretary General Guterres highlighted the possibility of establishing a humanitarian aid corridor from Bangladesh into Myanmar's Rakhine state. This initiative aimed at facilitating the delivery of essential aid to affected populations and create conditions conducive to the voluntary, safe, and dignified return of Rohingya refugees. The concept was framed as a confidence building measure to facilitate the safe, voluntary, and dignified return of the Rohingyas. While the humanitarian corridor concept is not new in international conflict resolution practice, its invocation in the context of Myanmar signaled a potential diplomatic turning point. Secretary General's call understood both the deteriorating human conditions in Western Myanmar and the international community's deepening concern over the absence of political will and sustained violence in the region. Following this proposal, the government of Bangladesh welcomed the idea in principle, viewing it as practical step toward repatriation and regional stabilization. However, Dhaka also emphasized the necessity of security guarantees, sustained international monitoring, and meaningful engagement from Myanmar junta and ethnic armed organizations. Meanwhile, responses from ASEAN member states were cautiously optimistic, while international human rights organizations expressed skepticism, citing the risks of militarized aid corridors and potential co optation by conflict actors. However, in the recent past, sufficient controversy arose within Bangladesh's policy circle and political parties about the concept and how actually to implement it. Within Myanmar, the reactions have been deeply fragmented. The military junta has attempted to frame the corridor as a sovereign humanitarian effort under its control, while ethnic armed organizations, particularly Arakan Army in the region, has rejected any such initiative that bypasses inclusive negotiation or fails to recognize their territorial authority. The corridor thus risks becoming a new theater of contention rather than a vehicle for peace, raising critical questions about consent, neutrality, and the broader political framework within which such a measure would be operationalized. The audience. Tonight's discussion seeks to unpack these complexities. Is the Rakhine Corridor a genuine pathway to peace? Or does it risk becoming another instrument of strategic control and violence? What are the implications of regional security, refugee repatriation, and international humanitarian law? And crucially, what role can Canada and other global actors play in ensuring that any such initiative aligns with the principles of human rights, accountability, and sustainable peace? We are grateful to our distinguished speakers, scholars, practitioners, and peace builders who today will bring deep insight and first hand experience into the conversation. Your contributions are invaluable as we seek not only to understand but to inform policy and practice that uphold dignity and justice. On behalf of the Creek board and project team, I thank you all for your presence and engagement. And let's begin our conversation. The audience, without further ado, let me first introduce Dr. Abdullah Al Yusuf, who is an Army veteran and a Rotary Peace Fellow. His academic areas of interest are migration, statelessness, and identity crisis. His research experience includes a study of the integration of Syrian refugees in Germany, the integration of the tribal people of Bangladesh in socio-economic mainstream, and most notably, the Rohingya identity crisis. At present, Dr. Yusuf collaborates with different think tanks and working on peace and security. Next, we have retired Lieutenant Colonel Colonel Manzoor Haq from Bangladesh Army, and he served Bangladesh Army for 21 years. And then he followed up a long career with the United Nations Department of Safety and Security. In short, is called UNDSS for the past 22 years. And he has served in some of the high risk duty stations, namely Iraq, Afghanistan, and Somalia. As part of his advisory role, he actively took part in humanitarian assistance planning under United Nations supervision. During his United Nations career, he has also worked from countries like Iraq, Jordan, Islamic Republic of Iran, Georgia, and lastly Azerbaijan, where he was the regional security advisor covering Russia, Russian Federation, and Azerbaijan. He finally retired in May last year and is currently spending his well-deserved retired life in Canada. Mr. Hawk also holds a master degree in defense and strategic studies from National University of Bangladesh, and it is also worth mentioning that he is my former commanding officer under who I served very proudly in Bangladesh. And the audience today, we also have in our studio our founding advisor, David Gerald Newman, our project core team member, Dr. Ernest Thiessen from Smart Settle, and also very happy to have Dr. Hilal Mohiuddin, our co-founder. So with this whole introduction part done, I think my job is a little less now, and I will keep monitoring and I will assist the presentation uh, of Dr. Yusuf's discussions. And before I get into the actual presentation, let me also share with you that first Dr. Yusuf will deliver his part, and followed by Colonel Muhammad Manzurul Haq, and then we'll open up for a brief Q&A session if we have enough time. Thank you. So, Dr. Yusuf, floor is yours, sir. You can go ahead.
Thank you, Kausar. Hello, everyone. I'm really indebted for inviting me to this very prestigious seminar, this CRIC webinar, to talk on a very pertinent issue, that is the Rakhine Corridor, whether it opens up a road to peace or it turns out to be a route to further violence. The thing started in last November 2024 with an UNDP report which predicted it made a sort of forewarning that the Rakhine state of Myanmar is about to fall into a famine. According to their report, by April and May this year, the total production of Myanmar, Rakhine state of Myanmar, is supposed to fulfill only 20% of the total people's need. And with all the communications and supply routes cut off, the state is supposed to be pushed into starvation. Following that, during the last 4 days visit of the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, his 4 days visit to Bangladesh, he proposed opening up a humanitarian channel to help send the essential humanitarian assistance to the people of Rakhine state of Myanmar. He also said that it would only be possible if all the parties to the conflict gives their consent and authorizes this kind of humanitarian assistance. He further hoped that this kind of humanitarian passage and humanitarian assistance to the people of Rakhine would probably uh, open up new opportunities for the voluntary repatriation of the Rohingya community who are now residing in Bangladesh. Since then, there had been heated debate in the social as well as the national media of Bangladesh regarding whether or not it would be prudent for the government of Bangladesh to provide such humanitarian corridor to the people of Rakhine. Because the opinion is divided, there are also the opportunities for Bangladesh to forge strong relationship to a new would-be neighbor, presumably the Arakan, and at the same time, such a move might involve, the severing the relationship between these two existing neighbors, I mean Bangladesh and the Union of Myanmar, and which might eventually force the Bangladesh to be drawn into a sort of proxy conflict with Myanmar. So the opinion was divided. So what the Bangladesh should do in this situation, whether to provide the corridor or not. So before going into the details of this discussion, for the global audience, I feel it's necessary to give an introduction of the geography and layout of the state of Rakhine, of Myanmar. So if we look at the map, the Rakhine state is located on the western part of Myanmar. Uh, it's along the eastern shore of the Bay of Bengal, bordering with Bangladesh in the north along the Naf River, and towards the east there is a huge mountain range known as Arakan Yama, which separates the Arakan state or the Rakhine state from the Myanmar proper. This narrow yet elongated strip of land with 360 miles of shoreline opens up this land to the seafaring nations, and over the ages it has better connection for trade and commerce purposes with the seafaring nations than that of the mainland Myanmar or Burma. And as the map shows, it's almost like an extension or extended corridor of the Ganges Delta, sort of forming a geographical contiguous part of Bangladesh itself. So over the ages, this land had better communication and better trade and commerce with the Bengal region, whereas it had hardly any connection, trade and commerce or cultural influence from the rest of the Myanmar. So having said that, now we can just go back to the issue of, whether or not the corridor should be given to the Rakhine state of Myanmar. So it is obvious that the Myanmar government is less likely to give consent or authorization to this kind of humanitarian assistance because it is them, the Myanmar junta, who has cut off all the communication or the trade and commerce with the Rakhine state of Myanmar. It is them who are really pushing the people of Rakhine into starvation. So it is unlikely that the Myanmar government will, come forward to this thing. So from Bangladesh point of view, there is, a dilemma because if either of the parties to the conflict opposes the giving of such a corridor, then the safety of the corridor might become at stake. So, despite the non-agreement or despite the declination of one of the conflicting parties, if Bangladesh moves forward to giving this corridor, then that might invite unnecessary antagonism with the Myanmar junta government. So there is the dilemma. So basing on that, the opinion of the people of Bangladesh had been largely divided. And there have been three perspectives, especially from if we talk about the humanitarian activists. They would say, why not to offer a corridor? Because during the last earthquake, Bangladesh has sent relief materials to Nipidol, but why not now? Now that the Rakhine people are starving, why don't we just send the humanitarian assistance to them? But if you ask a defense expert, he will rather urge upon to move more cautiously because he would view this whole thing from the security point of view. He would say, the defense expert would say that, providing corridor it is not an end in itself. The corridor has to be maintained, that has to be guarded, that has to be protected from probable interference by any of the parties who don't like to use of the corridor. So, and then there remains the possibility that the big powers, in the guise of providing humanitarian assistance, they could be supplying the military aid to the separatist party. I mean, especially the Arakan army, which might sever the relationship between Bangladesh and Myanmar. Then again, if we talk about an international relations specialist, he would probably suggest, charting through uh, the geopolitical landscape of the region. He would suggest that we should carefully take a look at the stakes involved in it. What are the important stakeholders, both internal and external, and what are their objectives and missions and purposes for this humanitarian corridor, and how you know devotedly or committed they would be to pursue their interest, and how much risk they would be willing to take. So all these things has to be taken into considerations before we really agree upon providing a humanitarian corridor. So that brings us to the sort of stakeholder analysis. What stakes are involved among the different parties to the conflict? So before we go into the details of the stakeholder analysis, uh, we have to understand that there are three internal stakeholders in this whole affair. One is the Rakhine people who are starving. The second is their co-ethnic, group who had been coexisting in the Rakhine state of Myanmar for 1,000 years. That is the Rohingyas, and finally the Myanmar Junta government or the State Administrative Council. And besides this, we have the external stakeholders like the United States, the China, and the India, as well as Bangladesh. So, before we understand the dynamics of the internal stakeholders, I would like to make a travel through the history to understand the ethnic dynamics which exist in this area. We have to really go back to 185 year BC to understand the population dynamics in the Rakhine state of Myanmar. Actually, the making of the Arakan state began with the fall of the Maurya Empire, with the demise of the Emperor Ashoka in the northern Indian part of, Bihar or Magadha. The Buddhists started facing a lot of persecution because when the Sunga and Gupta dynasties of rulers of India took over the power of that region, they started persecuting the Buddhists. So initially, there had been a lot of migration from the northern part of India, the Bihar state of India, Magadha. People had been fleeing mostly towards the east, towards the Bengal region, where Buddhism still held its sway. But still, one lost dynasty, the Lichavi dynasty, which was stationed in a place named Boishali in Bihar, they still held firm to their location. But by 320 AD, when the king Shumudragupta came to the power and expanded his empire, the Buddhists started suffering more persecution. And the Lichavi family didn't have any other option but to start migrating towards the east, following the Ganges Valley towards Bengal and beyond. So for the next 50 years, starting from 320 to 370 AD, people, faith, art, culture, and knowledge, technology started moving down south along the Ganges Valley through Bengal to Arakan. And in 370, the Lichavi king Van Chandra founded the first city-state named Boishali, arguably, and someone says it's Dhannavati, in Arakan. This name Boishali was named in commemoration with the city of Boishali, which they just left from Bihar. And the dynasty was named as the Lunar dynasty or the Chandra Vangsha. Now, one thing is very important to understand here, that while the king and the fighters from Bihar or Boishali came down from the northern part of India, but the making of the city states required a lot of workforce, the masons, the agriculturists, the farmers, and various other kind of professional classes to build a large city. And most of the people, the craftsmen, the artisans, the agricultural people, and other people who have to be brought from Gora. Gora is the place which is bordering the northwestern part of Bengal and the West Bengal. There is a famous city of Gora at that time, and most of the people were brought from there as the working class to build this city. And it is believed from the anthropological as well as the archaeological evidences and epigraphic evidences that the Rakhine or the Rohingyas whom we see today in a sort of statelessness, their ancestors are those people who came as the working class to build the city of Boishali, first city of Boishali, Dhanabati in Arakan. Next slide, please. And as you see, here is a chart which shows the arrival of different ethnic groups in Arakan. As I said, if you look at the first people to move into Arakan were the Lichavis, who were the Aryan people, and the Rohingya ancestors from Gora, who had been Dravidians, and the Rakhine ancestors who had been Indo-Mongoloid. They also came from Bihar, and this happened between 320 and 370, as I said. And later on, the next party or the next people to move into this area were the Arabs, came in the later 8th century. There is a saying that there had been a shipwreck. As I said, this was a seafaring nation. Arabs, a seafaring nation, used to frequently come and sail off at the coasts of Arakan for trade and commerce purposes. At one time, seven of their large ships were caught in a storm, and the ship wrecked, and the people sought refuge in Arakan. At that time, there was the king Mahatain Chandra, who happens to be a Rakhine. And it is very interesting to note that the Islam made its inroads into Arakan in the hands of, or under the sponsorship of King Mahatain Chandra, who very kindly allowed the Muslim sailors from Arab to get settled in Arakan, to marry the women of Arakan and start their family life and spread the religion. And next, where in 832, there was a raid on the upper Myanmar, which was known as at the time the Pew cities. And the upper Myanmar, the upper courses of Irrawaddy, there was a raid which is infamously known as the Nanchao raid. The people from the Kunming province, present Kunming province of China, raided the upper Myanmar, and that was the first time the Chinese people entered the upper Myanmar, and in consequence, by mid 19th century, the Pew people who had been attacked by the Nancha raid by the Burmese people, they moved further south. But unfortunately, in the southern Myanmar at the time, it was Mon Kingdom. Arguably, it was Hangshabati, or someone says it's Raman Desha. So that kingdom was equally powerful. So the Pew people could not move down south, and they crossed the Yama and entered Arakan. So we can see that until it was only the mid 19th century when, for the first time, the Burmese people entered Arakan. And until that time, the Arakan was the natural habitat for two people. That means the Rakhines and the Rohingyas. Next slide, please. And if we look at the period of Mongoloid influence, after arriving into Arakan, from 957 to 975, Mongoloid invasion and occupation of Arakan, these were actually intermittent, and they did not really mean to have a control over Myanmar or the Rakhine state of Myanmar or Arakan. They mostly came for looting and vandalizing. They went back. It was in 1018 to 1078 when Pagan, that means the dynasty which was then formed in the upper part of Irrawaddy, the upper Myanmar. The Pagans, they invaded, and Arakan became a feudatory state of Pagan. I'm not going into the much details. If we look at these slides, you can see the Mongoloid influence on the Arakan state lasted for 322 years only. And then for next 95 years, Pagan kingdom collapsed, and Arakan became an independent state again, and it extended its territory from Bengal up to Cape Negrais. And Ava kingdom in the upper Myanmar was actually established under the direct patronage of one of the leaders of Arakan. Later, as we can see, for the next 56 years, the Arakan turned into a battleground between Ava and Pegu Kingdom. And in 404, Ava Kingdom invaded Arakan, and King Naramekla he fled away to Bengal. Next slide, please. And here begins one more interesting story that's about the Rock U period, when the Arakan king Naramekla or Binsaw Mon, he fled to the Bengal Sultanate. He sought refuge in Bengal Sultanate. He served here under the Bengal Sultans as one of the generals for quite some times. And in 1430, he requested the Bengal Sultanate to provide him military assistance to regain his lost kingdom. And in 1430, with the help of two large Pathan army divisions, Naramekla was able to go back to Arakan and regain his lost kingdom, and that kingdom was christened as Brok U Kingdom. And this is the first time. This is once again the Islam started making its inroads into Arakan. Since at that time the Bengal Sultanate was influenced by the Islamic culture and Islamic religion, the Persian being practiced in the courtly affairs. So since then, until I would say the invasion of King Budalpaya of the present day Myanmar, this was under the Brok U rule almost for 500 years. This was an independent kingdom, free from any kind of feudatory status of either Myanmar or Bengal. And it was, next slide please. It was in 1757 the Alonpaya, Burmese king Alonpaya, who established the Konbaung dynasty, combining the upper and lower Myanmar or lower Burma. And 1784, Konbaung king Budalpaya invaded Arakan after 500 years of independent Rock rule. This was again when Burmese invaded into the Arakan territory. 200,000 Arakanese fled to Bengal to evade the massacre, and it included Rakhines as well as the Rohingyas. The Konbaung rulers initiated a deliberate process of Barbanization. The royal historians were employed to rewrite the history of Arakan with fabricated chronicles. The purpose was to delegitimize the ethnic identity of Rohingyas in favor of an overall Burmese national identity. The identity of Rohingyas, an issue of anthropological, cultural, linguistic, and historical analysis, turned political for the first time under the Gunbaum machination. The purpose of saying all these things is, if you go to the next slide, yeah, if you look at this slide, that Arakan survived as an independent kingdom for 1,167 years. It was a feudatory state of Pagan for 221 years, and it was under Ava rule for 26 years. Kunbong dynasty ruled this country for only 40 years, and the British ruled for 123 years. So if we look back to the last 2,000 years of the history of Arakan, we can comfortably say that it had been existing as an independent state for most of the time. And it was under the effective control of the Burmese people for only 40 years, from the 1784 invasion of King Bodapaya until the country again fall into the British colonial, form the part of the British colony in 1824 after the first Anglo-Burmese War. So basically, the people, the Burmese people or Bamar people, who are the majority of Myanmar now, who controls the state administrative council, they had been ruling this country. They had been ruling this country for only 40 years. The rest of the time, it's a history of independence. Next slide, please. Now, so as I said, that if we look at the two stakeholders, the Rakhines and the Rohingyas, they are the original people of this land. They had been peacefully cohabiting in this land for over 2,000 years. And the Burmese, they were basically outsiders. They entered in this region in later part of ninth century for vandalizing and other purposes. They frequently came and went back. And finally, 1784, they successfully brought Arakan under their control, and that lasted for only 40 years until 1824 when the British colonized the territory. Interestingly, within the Arakan society, if we look at the social identity or social stratification of these two group of people, the Rakhines and Rohingyas, you'll find that the Rakhines mostly constituted the upper class of the social strata. That means Brahmins and the Kshatriyas who used to fight. So interestingly, with every change of the ownership or the kingship of this territory, the warriors class or the ruling classes they changed. Sometimes the control of the territory was handed over from one ruling class to the other. So periodically, the Brahmins, the kings, and the soldiers they changed. But what really did not change is the working class. Starting from the 4th century, later part of 4th century, that means 370, since the establishment of the first city state, Boishali in Arakan, until today, it is the working class, the Rohingya ancestors, Rohingya successors, present Rohingyas, they have been, living in this land for this last 2,000 years as the working class. They have been giving their sweat, they have been baking the bricks, they have been cultivating the lands, they have been building the pagodas, temples, and everything as the mason and other, labors. And their fate did not change. Their status also did not change. Whoever came as king or the warriors, they remained as the working class, and they have the deepest and longest, relationship with the soil of this land. Next slide, please. Now that sometimes there is a debate that some people tend to label the Rohingya people as the Chittagonians. Well, uh, they have not really migrated from Chittagong under the British tutelage or British sponsorship. As I said, in 1824, when the Abha king Bodawpaya invaded Arakan, the Rakhines as well as the Rohingyas, they migrated to the Chittagong region for safety. The number was close to 200,000 people, both Rakhines and Rohingyas. When the British took over, they captured Arakan from the control of the Konbong dynasty, these are the same people, Rakhines, Rohingyas, they went back to their native land. So this is, reverse migration. This is not a migration per se. So they had migrated to Chittagong after being pressurized by the, or pursued by the Konbong rulers, and they went back to, the Rakhine state after the British took over control. Next slide, please. Okay. Now, having discussed the different aspects of the ethnic dynamics between Rakhines and Rohingyas and Burmese, the three key stakeholders, internal stakeholders in the Rakhine state of Myanmar, it is now time that we just take an account of the stakes of the external stakeholder. How much is their interest? What are their objectives and purposes, and how vehemently they would like to pursue their objective in this Rakhine state of Myanmar? These are necessary to understand what risks and opportunities are involved for Bangladesh in providing a humanitarian assistance corridor into that state. Let's begin with the China. As we know, the China has a very critical and probably most active stake in Myanmar. Many of the ethnic Chinese people live on the northern part of Myanmar, and Myanmar had been maintaining business and trade relationship with China for quite some times. And most notably, if you look at this slide, China's China Myanmar Economic Corridor (CMEC), which involves 5 lines of communication extending from Kunming through the middle Myanmar, Mandalay, and opening up in the Chokfu These five lines of communication includes a gas and oil pipeline, fiber optics cable line, and a road communication as well as railway communication. The gas operation started from 2013, I guess, and the oil extraction started from oil supply started since 2017. Since that time, the China had been relying heavily on this five-line communication or this CMEC for exporting gas or importing gas and oil from the rest of outside world into the landlocked Yunnan province of China. If we understand that if the Yunnan province, if you want to connect the rest of the world through this sea route, then it has to really travel through the South China Sea, through Malacca Strait, Indian Ocean, involving a journey of few thousand miles. Most of the time, traveling through a territory which is not so friendly to China. On the other hand, by establishing this corridor, China had been very, effectively and very profitably doing its business with the rest of the world. And China would be certainly very much interested to maintaining the safety and security of this five lines communication or the CMEC, the China Myanmar economic corridor. So during this recent violence, during ethnic conflict with the the State Administrative Council and the ethnic armed organizations in Myanmar, the safety and security of this five lanes of communication became at stake. And China had been negotiating with the military junta as well as the various ethnic armed groups to ensure the safety of these five lines of communication. Now the question is how China might respond to the aspiration of independence of the Arakan army. In my understanding, China will be equally comfortable to maintain good relationship with a united Myanmar as well as good relationship with an independent Rakhine as well as the rest of the Union of Myanmar, so long his economic interests are not disturbed. And we can see this because China had been negotiating and maintaining good relationship with the State Administrative Council as well as all the ethnic armed organizations right from the beginning. So China keeps all the doors open. Whatever happens, if the Rakhine becomes independent or not, China doesn't really, worry much, so long as his economic interests in this area are well preserved. So, in a recent visit to Bangladesh, the Chinese ambassador to Bangladesh, he also opined that the humanitarian corridor it's a United Nations initiative, and China would not like to get involved in it. But they have not really said anything in a very harsh tone that they're against it. They just say that they don't like to get involved in it because they don't want to get involved in the internal affairs of another country. So China's stance remains, I would say, moderate. China is fine with whether the corridor is given, whether the Rakhine state becomes independent or not, whether they remain united, whether there is a federal government in Myanmar, the Rakhine forming a federating unit of the Union of Myanmar. In every case, China is open to negotiation to all the parties so long as China's interest is preserved. Next slide, please. Next slide. India's stake is quite critical in this region. The previous one. As we can see, the mainland India, to maintain effective communication with the Seven Sisters in the east, India has to heavily rely on a very narrow corridor known as the Shiliguri corridor, which is also christened as chicken necks by some people. As you can see, that's a very narrow corridor. The next slide. It's only 21 to 22 kilometer wide and 48 kilometer in depth. So this is a narrow corridor through which the mainland India has to supply all its commodities and essentially the railway line, the road communication, and every other sorts of communication to connect the Seven Sisters has to pass through this narrow Shiliguri corridor, which is definitely a nightmarish experience for the Indian people because it has got the security threat. It is very close to the Chinese border, and it puts India in a very uncomfortable situation. So During the last regime of Bangladesh, the last Hasina regime, India negotiated some corridors and transits through Bangladesh to connect its eastern provinces, the Seven Sisters. But India must have been smart enough to understand that this honeymoon relationship with the Hasna regime would not last long, and today or tomorrow they have to find an alternative. So that is the time when India planned to connect the Seven Sisters in the east by sea route and followed by the river route and a road communication connecting the eastern coastlines of India, particularly Calcutta, to the Rakhine state up to the Aizawl of the Mizoram state of eastern provinces. So this is the next slide. This is a very convenient method for India, a convenient line of communication, which is popularly known as Kaladan Multimodal Transport Project, $1 million project, which aims at connecting India, mainland India, with the Seven Sisters, initially with a 539-kilometer sea route starting from Hooghly Port until Stui Airport, Seaport in Rakhine. From there up to the border of India again. Initially, there is a riverine communication following the Kaladan River up to Paletwa, and from Paletwa, there is road communication connecting the Mizoram state of India. So this is a very suitable and effective alternative for India to connect its Seven Sisters. India has invested heavily in this Kaladan project, and this is the only and reliable means for connecting the Seven Sisters after the precarious the Shiliguri corridor approach. So India has got a big stake in this, and India in all probability would like to safeguard its interest, maintaining the safety and security of this Kaladan multimodal project. But then again, India can do it by maintaining a close understanding, diplomatic relationship with a potentially or would be new state, Arakan, and India can also do the same with the Union of Myanmar. So just like the Chinese people, India is not in a, India is maintaining both ways open, both doors open. I mean, whether it's an independent Arakan, that's fine because they have to negotiate with Arakan then, Arakan army then, to maintain the safety of this, Kaladan project. And if it is of Union of Myanmar and Arakan forming a federating unit of the Union of Myanmar, that is still fine for India. So again, it's mostly an economic interest, not political per se, that India would be fine maintaining relationship with whoever comes out as the victors in this conflict. Next slide, please. So basically, these were the stakeholders, internal stakeholders, and China and India. And if we look at the U.S., what is the U.S. interest? We know that U.S. had been, trying to see democracy, freedom, and justice in Myanmar for quite some time. Initially, it sided with the Aung San Suu Kyi government, but Aung San Suu Kyi could not deliver. Now, with the Arakan army calling the shots or becoming the victorious, probably that opens up new opportunity for the U.S. Army to make fresh engagement with the Arakan army to spread democracy and check the Chinese influence in this region. But how strongly U.S. would pursue its ambition in this region remains a question, because especially if we look at the Trump administration, is more or less introvert policy, looking inwards, gives us a sort of signal that probably Trump would not really try for a much expansionist attitude in this region, as we have seen that during his last tenure also he had been pulling out forces from different parts of the world, and he doesn't seem to be pursuing the Pax Americana project so vehemently. And even if we look at the Burma Act itself, Burma Act really has two key provisions. One is to provide humanitarian assistance and to provide non-lethal assistance to the Arakan army or the separatist groups of Myanmar, the ethnic army organizations. And if we see the last budget allocation, there had been severe cut in the budget allocation. The USAID has been totally, their operation has been totally stopped in Bangladesh and elsewhere in the world. However, their engagement with the Rakhine people of Myanmar remains open, but the budget has been significantly reduced. And moreover, the subcommittee
Sorry,
which really approved, but
if you can
yeah.
conclude, sir, kindly. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, okay. So that's the American way. We say that America, it depends on how much they would like to pursue their ambition in this area. Depends on the Trump administration, which doesn't seem to be very, very much aggressive at this moment. So, given all these all these considerations, the Bangladesh has got three options open: whether they should give an unconditional humanitarian passage to the Rakhine state of Myanmar, should they deny the passage, or should they give passage with certain conditions? If they, give the open check, the unconditional passage, then definitely that involves the risk of, severe criticism. The Myanmar might raise the, question that whether or not this passage is being utilized for supporting its separatist movement, and that might sever the relationship of Myanmar with Bengal. The kind of risk Bangladesh must not take. And then again, if we talk about not giving the passage, that Bangladesh loses the opportunity of, raising its image as a global player, a humanitarian player, as well as they must sought for opportunity to forge a strong relationship with a nascent would-be neighbor, that is Arakan. So that option doesn't can also be ruled out. So we are left with only one option, that Bangladesh can probably provide humanitarian passage with certain conditions, and the conditions should be so structured that the possibility of Bangladesh getting involved in a proxy conflict with Myanmar is reduced to almost zero. The first thing Bangladesh can at best provide the humanitarian passage. Allow the use of that passage only, but Bangladesh may not take any active role in the conduct of that passage itself. That means the transportation or supply of any kind of humanitarian assistance must be under the arrangement and sponsorship of United Nations, and the whole move needs to be, undertaken or endorsed by a relevant UN Security Council resolution. All the activities must be carried out by the vehicles, personnel. Everyone must wear the UN insignia, visible UN insignia, logos. So it absolutely should be an international effort, an United Nations effort to support the people of, Arakan or Rakhine state of Myanmar. But Bangladesh only provides the passage. It only allows the use of the passage. The rest of the ownership of the entire operation remains with the United Nations. And most importantly, Bangladesh must negotiate a, confirmed deal with the Arakan army. The repatriation of Rohingyas must be explicitly, integrated with this passage thing, because this is the only stake Bangladesh has, the most important stake. Bangladesh wants to get rid of this 1.4 million forcibly displaced Myanmar citizens who had been living in this land for the last 9 years. They deserve to go back to their ancestral land. This is their right. As I've said, from the historical perspective, they belong to the Rakhine state of Myanmar. They belong to Arakan. They cannot stay indefinitely in Bangladesh as stateless people. So before any such arrangement is made, before any commitment for giving passage to Rakhine, humanitarian passage to Arakan is made, there has to be a clear commitment obtained from the Arakan army that the Rakhines or the Rohingyas will be allowed to go back to their ancestral land with full citizenship right. That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much
you.
for giving me time. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Wow, what a wonderful, traveling to the history. Dr. Yusuf has laid out the background and his suggestions of humanitarian corridor. Dear audience, let's welcome Colonel Retired Muhammad Manzurul Haq to the scene. And sir, floor is yours. You can go ahead. Unmute the mic, sir. First, go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kausar, for inviting me, and it's really a great pleasure participating in this webinar of your organization, CRIC. on such an important subject of our contemporary geopolitics and policy orientation in the region. Uh, Previous to this, Dr. Yusuf has very deliberately explained various dynamics of Myanmar as a conflict region in our neighborhood, and therefore I will not go into the intricacies of Myanmar details of conflict. Unfortunately, I don't have slides, but will use my written script to deliberate on the subject and later to have a discussion. I intend to complete my talk in approximately 20 minutes, if time allows, and of course, if there's a further discussion. But at the very outset, I wish to draw the attention of our audience to the theme of this webinar, which is Rakhine Corridor Road to Peace or Further Violence. So there is an or in between, either to have peace or some violence is expected. So there's a dilemma. My discussion will center around a few presumptions that the suggested corridor under discussion to be established has to be considering the famine-like situation in Rakhine, which could cause a humanitarian crisis in the region and thereby have direct impacts on Bangladesh. So my focus of deliberation is limited to what Bangladesh options have within the overall concept of humanitarian corridor led by United Nations. As we understand, the concept is at a very nascent stage of consultation with the United Nations, whereby we learned through media reporting that the interim government has agreed in principle to Bangladesh participation. Also, kindly note that I am not representing any organization since I am retired and not even representing the Bangladesh government policies, but my deliberation will reflect only my personal opinion. So hope you will bear with it. Having said that, let me start by quoting Jennifer M. Walsh, who authored a book titled Humanitarian Intervention and International Relations. While dealing with humanitarian interventions and dilemma associated with it, the author states, and I quote, "The issue of humanitarian intervention has generated one of the most heated debates in international relations over the past decade for both theorists and practitioners. At its heart is the alleged tension between the principle of state sovereignty and the evolving norms related to individual human rights." I unquote. In the context of Bangladesh, and more specifically establishing a Rakhine corridor in the event of a humanitarian crisis emerging in Rakhine state or deep inside Myanmar, needs a careful examination of the challenges and opportunities that may unfold over short to mid-term basis. I'm talking in terms of challenges and opportunities that it may present to Bangladesh. Worthwhile to note, no opportunities in politics are devoid of risk, and in this particular case, the risk of further violence that we need to look into if the corridor has to be established. Also important would be to examine the legitimacy and consequences of the use of military force for humanitarian purposes. Important to note that any future has to be under the supervision of United Nations. I think Dr. Yusuf has adequately addressed and emphasized that such efforts, humanitarian efforts, has to be under the supervision of United Nations with the participation of stakeholders, including Bangladesh. In Bangladesh, the topic has surfaced in the media and political arena, lots of criticism and skepticism in which national sovereignty and security risk to the nation is a common concern being raised. Understandably, the subject matter is believed to be at a very nascent stage, as I said earlier, and perhaps is at a consultative stage between the government of Bangladesh and the United Nations. So you will understand that my focus is limited to Bangladesh policies and not the other stakeholders. Historically, an increased incidences of intervention for humanitarian purposes post-Cold War was characterized by the alleged conflict between sovereignty and human rights, which has been addressed in one of the two ways, through an evolution in the notion of sovereignty as to sovereignty as responsibility. and through an expanded definition of what constitutes a threat to international peace and security under Chapter 7 of the United Nations Charter. Now, despite the climate of permissiveness, humanitarian intervention remains a controversial norm in international relations, largely because of the continued opposition from certain members of the international society and concerns about its potential negative consequences of domestic in nature. A narrative of suspicion and skepticism, as has been allegedly expressed by political actors in Bangladesh recently. While the post-Cold War period has seen some successful cases of intervention to address humanitarian catastrophes, the current capability of international organizations to undertake humanitarian intervention remains limited for various reasons, complexity in delivering the operations, regional geopolitics, funding, etc., etc. Indeed, the issue of humanitarian intervention, though permissible under international humanitarian law, has the potential to divide international opinion and thus damage their credibility. And in the past, the United Nations has examples of losing credibility because of some concerns as has been expressed. Now, let me touch base on the concept of limited sovereignty, which I think I consider it pertains to the third world nations. When we talk about limited sovereignty, it comes with a responsibility. My research based on historical analysis and philosophical reasoning lead to argument that state sovereignty is inherently limited. The writings of classical theorists such as Grotius and Vettel, who are European philosopher, diplomat, and jurist of 18th century, who were renowned for their work on the laws of nation, they indicate that aspirations to sovereignty by individual nations and non-intervention have always been overtaken by considerations above and beyond the state. Philosophically, it must be remembered that sovereignty is a right, and the concept of a right makes no sense in the absence of corresponding duty. The duties that are constitutive of rights of sovereignty constrain the behavior of every sovereign nation belonging to international society. Now, here I would like to relate with what narrative is being generated in Bangladesh in terms of sovereignty, the rights, and the state security, national security, and so on and so forth. Historically, again, despite objections by individual nations, military intervention in cases of supreme humanitarian emergency can be defended on moral grounds, and that's what Bangladesh should be looking at, provided the intervention meets certain tests of legitimacy. Given the unintended consequences of military action, many scholars also suggest that more attention should be paid to the non-military means of operationalizing sovereignty as responsibility, such as soft power, use of soft power, which Bangladesh lacks perhaps. United Nations has been at the center of key field operations and policy debates relating to humanitarian intervention since the end of Cold War. However, the issue of humanitarian intervention also poses a challenge to the United Nations and its member states and could even undermine the organization. At the heart of UN's difficulty is a delicate balance between the rights of individuals and the rights of states. With regard to the definition of UN Humanitarian Corridor, which perhaps is well understood by now, but for the purpose of today's discussion, I wish to define a humanitarian corridor, a type of temporary demilitarized zones essentially agreed by parties to the armed conflict, and is intended to allow the safe transit of humanitarian aids into an affected region, or refugees and IDPs evacuated out of a crisis region. Now, there are a couple of examples that UN has experienced through, and I would like to point out that questions may arise that contrary to delivery of humanitarian aids into the target conflict zone, what happens to civilians as displaced people who want to leave conflict zones but cannot do so? Now, as we are talking about this corridor, both environment could prevail as humanitarian actors are trying to push in the assistance and the aid. At the same time, the famine and the intensity of the conflict may allow or may have the influx of IDPs and refugees getting out of the conflict region, and perhaps Bangladesh will be subjected to acceptance of such environment. One way is through humanitarian corridors, which are sometimes called humanitarian safe passages. As an example of a safe passage from the recent past is Lachin Corridor between Azerbaijan and Armenia. I believe most of you are conversant about what happened in 2023 September, and incidentally, I was at that time based in Azerbaijan when a humanitarian corridor was facilitated, not initially by the United Nations, but by the government of Azerbaijan itself, to allow passage of Armenian ethnic population in Karabakh region, along with the armed forces and the militias, to thin out the objectives that they intended to bring it to the to liberate Nagorno-Karabakh. So basically, a huge migration of people living in Karabakh region took place through this Lachin corridor. And of course, it became a nightmare for the United Nations on the other side of the borders, which is Armenia, to house and facilitate and support this huge ethnic Armenian population evacuated out of Azerbaijan. So this is one of the examples that I wanted to quote, that an humanitarian assistance corridor could also lead into a massive passage of displaced people into another region, and Bangladesh could face that as well. When we talk about Rakhine Humanitarian Corridor, we really need to analyze its permissibility by looking into factors like regional geopolitics and stakeholders, and I don't want to get into the details. Dr. Yusuf has adequately covered about the China factor, the Chinese national interest of dominance and access to Indian Ocean, their pipelines, economic corridor, as well as Indian interest, which is also to have access to their seven sisters through Kaladan project. Noteworthy is the recent US interest and enactment of Congress bill named Burma Act, which partly Dr. Yusuf has also covered. Basically, this Burma Act authorizes US funding, whatever is needed to establish human rights and democracy in Myanmar and make the junta government accountable, and replace it with a democratically elected government, which is an aspiration of national unity government in Myanmar. There are other strategies like Indo-Pacific strategy and Quads. The wider objective and intention needs to be kept in mind as well. The role of ASEAN and Myanmar as a member state of this forum is also significant. So these are some of the dynamics of regional politics that needs to be considered while making a decision with regard to the corridor. Now, within these conflicting interests, what should be the Bangladesh interest here? I consider return of Rohingya refugees remain to be the primary strategic goal of any Bangladesh support to this initiative. Question remains, can we really achieve this national objective on a bilateral basis? Or for that matter, any other alternative formula needs to be evolved, involving major international partners. For almost a decade, bilateral diplomatic efforts with the government of Myanmar did not really give any dividends to Bangladesh, and refugees kept on increasing. And as latest estimate says, almost 1.5 million refugees, the Rohingyas, have crossed over into Bangladesh. And this is a big security dilemma for Bangladesh. Now, coming back to the humanitarian corridor and likely mandate of any future operations, most often than not, humanitarian interventions are authorized operations by the UN Security Council resolutions and are given clear mandate in terms of reference. So in any future humanitarian interventions in Arakan, it is likely that United Nations will have the lead, whereby the role of various actors will be well specified. Now, I will touch base on a little bit of the process involved in the humanitarian assistance planning by the United Nations, because I do have some experience working together with our humanitarian partners. I, being the the member of the Department of Safety and Security, our role was basically to support humanitarian assistance, um, keeping in mind that the program must be conducted under a safe environment, and thereby the role of UNDSS, which was my department, was to basically make assessments to support the humanitarian cause, and basically it would lead to identification of the risk and recommend mitigation measures. Now, it is exclusively a United Nations mechanism of assessments and decision making, whereby it is assessment based. Similarly, we also do expect at national level, Bangladesh should conduct its own assessments based on ground reality and some of the dynamics that we both have talked about, Dr. Yusuf and myself. Also, we need to take note of that no corridor can be established without the consent of all parties. And I believe United Nations, before they officially request the government of Bangladesh to provide support to the corridor, they must have, they must be in the process of consultation with major stakeholders internally to Myanmar and external in the region. So that's an assumption again. What it implies that any future Rakhine humanitarian corridor, if authorized, will be led by the United States, as I've mentioned about, with the consent of the parties. At this stage, participation of Bangladesh forces in the operation can be conceived only in support role, if not otherwise authorized. Now, I will not go into the situation and analysis part of it, because those are part of the assessment on the part of the government before they make any decisions. However, among all other factors, one needs to also analyze how Burma Act will define the role of US in the region. As we all know, that Burma Act passed by the US Congress aims to establish democracy and human rights through wide-ranging funding to various entities in Myanmar. If we study the details of Burma Act, we also find the US calls for greater effort by the United Nations. So invariably, whatever corridor and humanitarian assistance is provided could be also part of the Burma Act, as the US government would like to have. As part of Burma Act, again, United States government may also ask the United Nations Security Council to consider multilateral sanctions against the Burmese military for its atrocities against the Rohingyas and individuals of other ethnic and religious minorities. Now, what should be the Bangladesh strategic interest in the region as regards this corridor that we are talking about? Firstly, safe return of Rohingya refugees, ensure stabilization in Rakhine state and greater Myanmar region, deter any influx of arms and drugs through Rakhine into Bangladesh, and of course, territorial integrity of land and sea borders. The above national interest, as I mentioned, needs to be achieved through aggressive multilateral diplomatic efforts, including to remain engaged with any UN efforts on humanitarian assistance to the people of Arakan. Bottom line, Bangladesh in isolation will not be able to achieve any of these national interests, therefore calls for prudent approach, proactively working close with major stakeholders in the region, including US and the United Nations. And this is where I very much second what recommendations Dr. Yusuf has made in his deliberation. Importantly, there is a need for diplomatic and security engagement with Arakan Army and National Unity Government as well. Now, as we understood, the National Unity Government at a political end had been expecting Bangladesh to also cooperate and provide support at one stage. I'm not sure about the latest position, but if that is so, it's an opportunity to engage at a diplomatic level. And of course, the security apparatus can always engage with the Arakan army. And I believe some sort of backdoor diplomacy is ongoing. And that should intensify, that should go about, not limiting Bangladesh government diplomatic efforts with the Janda government alone. Now, I'm reaching to my end of presentations, but of course I would like to mention, if Bangladesh is offered a request to support humanitarian assistance, what role Bangladesh armed forces could take. Besides, I'm not talking about the political and the diplomatic efforts, but the security forces could assist United Nations in establishing humanitarian corridor by establishing UN forward logistic base. The dumping has to take place, the warehouses. It could assist shipment and transportation from port to the delivery points under UN supervision, the route protection and the security of UN warehouses, ensure territorial integrity, and provide physical protection of humanitarian corridors up to the border crossing points. Now, this is something that drew my attention while listening to the media and the political figures. They expect by establishing or they conceive that by establishing a humanitarian corridors, Bangladesh armed forces will be required to go across the borders, which is very unrealistic. United Nations knows the implications of such, and in the past, they have never forced a member state to go across unless it's part of coalition forces and as part of UN Security Council resolutions for enforcement of peace. That is Chapter 7 of United Nations Charter. Now, I would like to mention here that under the circumstances as discussed, any operational involvement of Bangladesh forces across the international borders, as I've mentioned about it, that is inconceivable. Drawing conclusion by some of the domestic political entities with regard to possibility of cross-borders operations by Bangladesh forces, and therefore, the high risk to national security is viewed to be, first of all, a premature conclusion based on political and media rhetoric, is indicative of lack of understanding on the national security and the nature of military operations in support of UN humanitarian operations. And therefore, a risk-averse policy approach considered highly likely that an opportunity will be missed once again by the Bangladesh. Now, let's see what are the options open to Bangladesh if a UN official request is made. And it does conform to what Dr. Yusuf said. Bangladesh has an option to diplomatically refuse any UN request, thereby status quo is maintained with regard to the Rohingyas. The second option could be a conditional agreement, which is a preferred and interim option. And the third option could be participate in the Security Council authorized wider multinational peacekeeping or humanitarian operations aimed to create safe zones in Rakhine State. Now, here comes the concept of safe zones, which Bangladesh should aggressively pursue through diplomatic channels, involve the United Nations, involve the stakeholders in the region, including China, India, and also greater participation of United States. Now, implications if non-participation implies that Bangladesh will be left out to manage the Rohingya crisis in isolation and on a bilateral basis, which has not paid dividends so far. There could be reduced international assistance in future, both in terms of funding and the active role of major players. And also, not engaging with the national unity government and the Arakan army would perhaps lead to further enhancement of risk in a long-term basis, whereby Arakan Army's ambitions towards Teknaf region and San Martin Islands will remain active and therefore remain unchecked. We can only hope for a direct engagement with these forces rather than left them alone and create a serious security risk for the country. Contrary to refusal, a conditional acceptance of United Nations request implies that a coordination channel or mechanism at operational level can be opened under the supervision of United Nations, and this will allow Bangladesh government authorities to negotiate with the National Unity Government and the Arakan Army. It will also allow some bit of, again, this is expected, that some understanding of Arakan army and the other resistance forces about the need for Bangladesh involvement as a neighboring country, and thereby there will be a check on the growth of militancy from among Rohingya population. That's from Bangladesh perspective. I would think that rise of militancy in the region is a no option. Some scholars and some critics have suggested formation of Rohingya military component and put them across the borders to fight with Arakan army to establish their return and the relevancy in the Rakhine state. So that is again, I would consider that's not an option, because we would not like to have another militancy situation in the neighborhood. I would tend to conclude here and saying that whatever I have mentioned is exclusively from my own perspective and through my experience working with different United Nations missions in difficult environments, the high-risk duty stations, where UN has conducted humanitarian assistance programs, established corridors, and where we have been able to conduct various assessments for decision makings. And of course, within the overall purview of these assessments and support, risk reduction was one of the primary focus of my department. And thereby, I always consider that any opportunity will present some security risk, but that does not mean that we should stand risk averse and not take any opportunities or any, the positivity of any such initiatives. I would tend to close my discussion here and back to Dr. Kausar for any questions from the audience or any participants, and we can have further discussions if time permits, of course.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. I think it's such a well-rounded discussions, and we are now, I think, have a fair bit of idea what kind of corridor we are talking about, and the risks involved, vulnerabilities involved, and who all are the stakeholders. So we are running out of time, of course, but I tend to really listen to our advisors today and the project core members. So I would open the floor now for our advisor David Newman, co-founder Dr. Hilal, and Dr. Ernest Thiessen. Please come forward with your questions and queries, because we have to be really kind of catch up with this new development that is happening in that part of the area. Floor is open. Anyone can shoot a question to our presenters. Go ahead.
I think Ernest would go first, or Hilal, and I'll just quickly offer that I am going to be presenting, I think, on Tuesday. And I'm going to be offering an entirely different approach based on personal experience and really a hopeful approach for an entirely different way of looking at this. Because I think it's time to break away from the suppression of history and move into a new way forward. So I will leave it at that and leave it to Hilal and Ernest to finish off, and my approach will be available next Tuesday. Thank you.
Okay, well, I understand there's not much time left, so just some short answers to a couple of things would be fine. This was very interesting and involved, and very complex. I'm just wondering how long this idea of a corridor has been around. Has it been years in the making or months in the making? And is it just sort of, why is there particular attention being uh, focused on it exactly right now?
Go ahead, sir. You can answer. Yeah.
Okay, if I may. Well, the concept of this humanitarian corridor had been existing for quite long at the policy level. However, recent, I would say, announcement by the foreign advisor of the Indian government, where he indicated that United Nations has approached Bangladesh government, and as a matter of principle, they're agreeing to participate. So this was initiating point, which created a lot of debates in Bangladesh, and it started only, I think, if I'm not wrong, Dr. Kasser, about a month back. That it came into media and widespread criticisms at one point, speculations that it's not a good idea for the Bangladesh to take that risk. Of course, there were pros and cons being viewed by different policymakers, and of course, our think tanks, both military establishment and diplomatic. And also, in addition, the political organizations, they considered that, well, this is not a good idea, and who is the interim government to accept the UN proposition? So this is a controversial subject, and that's why I tried to focus from Bangladesh perspective, whether it's a good idea to commit Bangladesh, and specifically Bangladesh Armed Forces, in support of UN humanitarian effort. Of course, there are various dynamics in the across the region, across the borders. But yeah, this is a dilemma. So to cut it short, about a month.
Okay,
Dr.
well,
Yusuf.
not very long, but I think this underscores the difficulty of the way negotiations have been going on for so long, issue by issue, and as you know, we're trying to bring a different approach to this using some sophisticated technology that would enable the stakeholders to really make a comprehensive approach to peace in Myanmar, and so it would facilitate the agreement of all the stakeholders. And you made the point that this isn't going to work unless all the stakeholders agree to it, or maybe most of them, but whether you get further violence or not depends on the degree of agreement, and whether they're going to really stand by it. So it's going to take me a little time to review this, and we'll just incorporate it into the simulation that we're building. So that's all I got.
Okay, just a few comments from my side, as Ernest has very rightly said that how long this issue had been on the table. Uh, the, some of the associated questions could be: is there any humanitarian crisis? Who are the sufferers? Who has asked for this humanitarian assistance? Of course, it is the people of Rakhine who had been enduring the conflict for quite some times, and they are supposed to make the call. And have we heard anything from Arakan Army or the United League of Arakan, or had there been any voice from the ordinary people of Arakan asking for humanitarian assistance? We haven't heard that. We have heard the call was from the UNDP. That call was made in the back last year in the month of November, and the prediction was that by April or May there could be a famine-like situation, people starving in Rakhine State, and the call was initiated by them. So that raises some suspicion among the people who views this as more of a political move than that of a humanitarian move. I mean, there are questions from the critics whether is it to provide humanitarian assistance to the ordinary people of Rakhine, or is it to help the Arakan army to with the essential non-lethal yet military supplies like the communication equipments and other things which might help them win over the Myanmar junta. So there are some speculations like that. So that makes the decision making all the more difficult because things are not being viewed so in a so plain and simple manner. I mean, it's not as humanitarian as it might look at first sight. There are some security implications as well. So the question asked by Ernest is quite, pertinent. And before making any such decisions, all these worries and concerns must also be taken into due consideration by the
Thank,
governments of Bangladesh.
thank, thank you, Dr. Hilal. Please.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Yusuf and Dr. Hawk. It's a well-rounded discussion for sure. And the thing is that it's a very quick, the first development, I think, from last November and until now. So there are a lot of confusions, and it's very common that it would happen. We were expecting that something would be very contentious, very debatable, especially among the Bangladesh people, policy discussions, at the same time, the security experts, and that is taking place, what we have just thought. But to my assessment, 'cause I have done some literature review, and to my assessment, it's a great opportunity for Bangladesh. It's my personal opinion, my personal viewpoint that it's a great opportunity for Bangladesh to become connected in the world scene, especially as an actor, political actor. You already mentioned that quite nicely. And that's really attracted me very well that Bangladesh can't, at this stage, especially after ousting an autocratic government, Bangladesh can't just remain isolated from the world scene. And there are many other geopolitical equations. So, in this situation, Bangladesh must show its independence, its sovereignty, and its a focus on, at the same military and economic sort of arrangements, both sides, everything taking into consideration. So this is why, to me, it's a great opportunity for Bangladesh. Of course, Bangladesh needs to be very careful about making the decision, just making a clear road plan. My concern, just to some extent, is why Bangladesh government is just going back and forth and not being able to make a good decision just because of the populist resentment, populist disagreement, like the main opposition party in Bangladesh, BNP, it looks like it's not for the arrangement. It was just complaining why you did not discuss with us. We were not consulted. We were not collaborated when you took the decision. So it was one. Other than that, I see the prospect that China is not mm, that opposing to this idea. So they have a soft voice. ASEAN has a very soft voice. NUG has a very soft voice. Arakan Army has a soft voice. Even India is not really reacting that strongly. So we have all the positive indicators there. Still in this situation, why Bangladesh government is just dragging behind in terms of its decision making, it's just for the populist urge that something is going to happen, Bangladesh independence, Bangladesh sovereignty will be compromised. This sort of concerns and fear would be always there. So, do you think that the Bangladesh government must have or need to have a kind of national dialogue among the policymakers, geopolitical analysts, and others, like one national sort of discussion? National, they can have it, because this is one of my question whether it would help. Number one, because just to clear up the minds of the common people, because they are in huge confusion. They don't know what's gonna happen. So this is why they are confused, and lots of social media narratives are coming up, and people are cooking up different sort of misunderstandings, miscommunication, misinformations are also flying around. So we can get rid of that using this. Number one. Number two, uh, whether the most important one that it just slipped from my mind right now, that whether the Bangladesh government needs to make a deliberate, oh no, sorry, Bangladesh government is just not being very determined to make a decision because it's an interim government. Is it just thinking that, look, we will not be here after 4 months, 6 months, or down the road, maybe 1 year? And then what will happen after that? If we do something and the next government comes and the next government can take it over appropriately or properly, or in the same vein, the way we are approaching or we are seeing the problem, because Dr. Khalilur Rahman, who is there as our security advisor, it's my personal opinion. It sounded to me like that this person is really very knowledgeable in terms of geopolitical decision making, especially security sort of decision making, and he was really trying to take this advantage just to show that Bangladesh as it's not an isolated entity, but it's a good player in the region, in the subcontinent at the same time, Southeast Asian region as well. So he, to my understanding, that he read the real geopolitical stakes properly. But the thing is that they are in confusion whether to approach that to government people, or whether the common people will really understand it or not, because populist sort of thoughts are flying all around. So that's what it is. Just if this is because they're just going back and forth, or not being that determined or that confident, because of their short-lasting government and kind of people-centered legitimacy of the government. So whether these are the reasons that are taking the government behind from taking a good decision. Thank you.
Okay. So before I request the presenters to comment, I have a very interesting question from one of the audience members who is with us for past almost 1 hour and a half. So here is the question. I read out: will it be in the best interest? You can see it here too in the screen. Will it be in the best interest of Bangladesh to provide safe passage for Rohingyas in a limited time, maybe 1 or 2 years? So, with Dr. Hilal's comment and with this question, now Colonel Manzoor, if you kindly weigh in first, followed by Dr. Yusuf.
Thank you, Kaushal. I think the questions and the observations are very pertinent. First, as regards the political dialogue within the country, it's absolutely a must. All stakeholders must be brought in, and various think tanks, and of course the advisors, relevant advisors from the interim government should really share with the stakeholders and domestically as to what the request has been made and where do we stand. An engagement with the political entity would be fruitful, of course, in the longer run. With regard to the safe passage of Rohingyas back to where they come from, is exactly what is intended objective should be for Bangladesh. It may not be on an immediate term, but of course, 2 years is a long time within which, and I think the chief advisor, while visited by the Secretary General, also did mention that in 1 year time he would like to see refugees going back. So if the objectives are clear and engage with the major stakeholders, I think Bangladesh needs the support of international organizations like United Nations, and of course US support could be conditional and could be useful at times, because as it has been already mentioned, there is no serious reservations of China and India. In that case, Bangladesh should really identify which path it should take on and aggressively conduct a diplomatic engagement with all stakeholders, including in the Myanmar as well as external powers. So that's how we are looking at it, and that should be the final one of the objectives that Bangladesh should achieve. I hope I've addressed that.
Thank
I'm
you.
sorry.
Dr. Yusuf. Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you, sir.
Yeah. Well, I don't think that the possibility of providing a humanitarian passage to the Rakhine people was out of the mind of the present interim government, especially during the last visit of the UN Secretary General. The activities, the speeches, the promises made by Dr. Yunus, the head of the interim government, gave me a feeling that probably this was a sort of planned planned event. He had been deliberately trying to find a way to send back the Rohingyas to their ancestral land. So the bringing of the Secretary General was probably one of the essential first step to initiate the process. And the issue of humanitarian passage came as an essential, sort of precondition to move ahead with the possibility of sending Rohingyas back. So this doesn't look like a sudden development, especially viewed from the interim government's perspective. Probably Dr. Yunus was trying to create an environment, a situation, a sort of conducive environment wherein the dialogues can be open with the Arakan army to send the Rohingyas back in exchange of providing them the humanitarian support. But at the same time, since the interim government is not an elected one, it is very difficult for them to take any decision unilaterally or say on their own. There comes the need for consulting with the various political parties, especially when the humanitarian passage has been deliberately securitized, I would say. It has been securitized because especially the Bangladesh has, after the July uprising, Bangladesh has broken free from the Indian influence, decades-long Indian influence, and now gradually trying to move closer to the Chinese for economic and other purposes. So, viewed from that perspective, trying to cooperate with a proposal which apparently has been initiated by US at the behind the screen, there are speculations that agreeing to the providing the humanitarian passage could sort of create a sort of what should I say, resentment among the Chinese people, considering the superpower play in this region, that the growing U.S. inroads into this region might, make China unhappy. So there have been cautious moves. From that point of view, spatially, and then again, the security situation in this region has become murky following the Indo-Pak recent warlike situation in Kashmir. Considering that among the common people, ordinary people, there is a fear that whether a so-called humanitarian passage could create further security challenges for Bangladesh. So it's quite necessary for the government to consult all the relevant stakeholders, include internal as well as external stakeholders, the political parties, to reach any such decision. And about the passage for 2 years, I think this thing needs a little bit of clarification. The humanitarian passage is not a permanent arrangement. There is an opening time, there is a closing time for the humanitarian assistance passage, and there is a duration. By agreeing to providing humanitarian passage to the Rakhine state does not mean that this is a blanket approval by the Bangladesh government to continuously send things to and from the Rakhine state of Myanmar. This has to be period specific. It has to be time specific. There has to be an opening time and a closing time. This is not an indefinite arrangement, because any indefinite arrangement might look like compromising with the sovereignty of the country. So there is no issue of 2 years period. This humanitarian passage may remain open for a stipulated time with a designated or specified opening and closing time. And the taking back of the refugees or the forcibly displaced Myanmar citizens, that is Rohingyas, to Rakhine, it should be a separate arrangement, of course, closely integrated with the issue of humanitarian passage. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. The audience, we need to close. It was quite an extended discussions today and quite enlightening because possibly we have today we have had Colonel Manzurul Haq, who actually worked in those circumstances where United Nations assisted opening up and maintaining humanitarian corridors, as you have heard. And also, Dr. Yusuf gave us a very broad overview historically how the population of that part of the world is still negotiating identities and what are the roles of stakeholders. So, to summarize, I think three things stood out for me as a moderator and a researcher in this project. One is it is important that Bangladesh, as major stakeholder, need to understand the ramification of the proposed corridor, and of course through the discussions of Dr. Hilal and others, it is really important that all these stakeholders in Bangladesh must be involved in a national collaboration and dialogue in terms of understanding the various parts of these proposed corridor. And most importantly, as we are running the project of Global Affairs Canada called Peace in Myanmar, we are all deeply interested how this proposal might shape up our ideas of mini Marshall Plan, reconstruction of Rakhine, and thereby the ending of decades-long conflict. And we have had interesting parts of the discussion that shed light on particularly what Arakan can become in the future. If you go back to Dr. Yusuf's discussion, that Arakan had been an independent area for over 1,000 years actually, and then of course geopolitics changed and what we have now. And most importantly, both the presenters emphasize the point that Bangladesh's national interest is to see Rohingyas are repatriated as the swiftest possible time, and of course with dignity and the rights and protection and the security. So with this, I will close the session today. Once again, on behalf of the Institute, I would like to express my deep gratitude to Colonel Muhammad Manzurul Haq and Dr. Abdullah Yusuf for spending their time at Colonel Manzoor's place. It is almost midnight. I'm so sorry, sir, to keep you up at this age. You are supposed to be retired, not working. And Dr. Yusuf was very kind to participate and prepare the slides, which we'll put it up with his permission in the website. The audience, please tune in on 13 next Tuesday at the same time. We are going to invite and listen Dr. David Newman's very interesting proposition how to reconcile transitional justice in Greater Myanmar to end this conflict. And please follow us in our social media sites. This whole webinar has been live streamed in our Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube channel. Please subscribe our YouTube channel so that you can always get a notification when we actually broadcast something new. And also, you will find us in CB24 network IPTV channel in North America. Until then, let's hope for the best for the peoples of Myanmar, Rakhine, and particularly Bangladesh when it is going to transition and with regards to this particular event. Stay well till then, and bye bye for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you.